with One Chiropractic, continuing this conversation. Unfortunately, we're starting to get near the end of our time with Dr. Hoffman. I think we got one more session after this. But today, we started touching on the heart, right? We started touching on heart rate variability. And I want to expound on that a little bit more today, because I know there's a lot to help us connect, because maybe to some chiropractors, they're like, okay, that's never been a correlation I've ever made before. So I want to spend a little bit more time diving into that correlation between the brain and the heart. So why don't you go ahead and lead us off here, Doc?
Beautiful. So what we talked about on the last video was doing heart rate variability to evaluate autonomic nervous system function. If one, optimal neurological expression is our end result, our game, the reason we exist, we've got to have an ability to evaluate how the neurological expression is being expressed or not properly. So heart rate variability to me is a must. It's a must. So the question comes up, how does the heart and the brain connect? And the truth is, it's how does the heart, the brain, and the gut connect? And that gets back to the single most important nerve in the body. And this is, again, a myth. If you would ask 100 chiropractic patients, what do you think is the most important nerve in the body? Most of them would say sciatica, but it's the vagus nerve.
Yep.
It's the vagus nerve, cranial nerve 10. And we have to become more masterful at how to evaluate the cranial nerves and how to rebalance the cranial nerves. And this is a missing piece for so many of us. I just finished reading a book called Assessing the Healing Power of the Vagus Nerve. I'm not telling you to go out and read it. I read it. It's not an easy book to read, but it's filled with phenomenal information. There is tons of information out there about how the vagus nerve is so critical. In fact, I've recently read some medical research that says this, get this, the #1 predictor of survivability of all cancers, regardless of the cancer type and the patient's age, is the tone of that patient's vagus nerve. Holy crap.
Wow.
Holy crap. So Vegas is it. There are endless things that anyone could do to stimulate vagal tone, but let me tell you, the most profound, most dramatic, most effective way to stimulate the vagal tone is by adjusting the upper cervical spine. We got to get that.
Yep.
And we have to be cognizant. When we look at a brain-based practice, there are really only a couple of keys. We've got to rebalance the autonomics, getting us out of fight, flight, freeze, and back into sympathetic healing. We've got to stimulate and retone the vagus nerve. And we've got to remove any dural tension. You do those 3 or 4 things, you're golden in 99% of the cases. And we haven't even talked yet about nutrition for the brain, or exercise for the brain, or stress management for the brain, or even some technology like brain tap for the brain. We haven't even touched any of that. Another day, another time. But the fact is, we have to be cognizant to evaluate vagal tone. Even when you were a little boy or a little girl and you went to your family medical doctor, and they would take out of their pocket this wooden stick and stick it down your throat and did a gag reflex. That gag reflex is to evaluate vagal function. Your gag is from vagus. So the vagal tone is critical. And part of this process of transitioning from pain to brain to evolving into a brain-based chiropractic practice is we need to evaluate vagal function. We need to evaluate autonomic function, vagal function, because the vagus connects our brain to our heart, to our gut. There's a ton of research out there that talks about the fact that it's your gut microbiome that affects everything. And how it does that is through the vagus. I'm currently reading a new book called Lifespan by the world's leading authority on aging, who talks about the value of the vagus nerve. I mean, it's everywhere. If you read any of Dave Asprey's books, like Headstrong, he talks a lot about the vagus nerve. It's everywhere. We have to recognize that no one's talking about pain. Everyone's talking about the brain and parts of the brain. The cranial nerve 10, obviously all cranial nerves are important, but cranial nerve 10 is the most important cranial nerve, and you should be evaluating it and working on stimulating it. There are even sounds and frequencies that help us stimulate vagal tone. Gargling, singing stimulates vagal tone. Coming out of the shower in the morning for the last few minutes, putting on the water ice cold, even though that might feel uncomfortable until you get used to it, stimulates vagal tone. There's an endless list of ways. Being out in nature and grounding and earthing yourself stimulates vagal tone. I just had at a Master Circle event, the father of grounding, Clint Ober. He wrote the original book. He's published 17 peer-reviewed research articles. He was our guest speaker. You know what he taught us? That when your body is grounded, you cannot have inflammation. Holy mackerel. Inflammation is the cause of all disease. Right. You can instantly eradicate inflammation by grounding. And he showed us a chart that in 1960, when we started to rubberize our shoes and disconnect from Mother Earth, was the exact onset of almost all the neurological diseases we have. So there's so much stuff that we need to know about earthing, about balancing, about laughter. Laughter stimulates vagal tone. So when I missed my point, I apologize. When I had Clint Ober, what he did is he hooked all of us up to grounding, to ground ourselves while he lectured to us. But what I did is I had one of our members, a terrific member, I asked him to check a parietal reflex on 6 doctors in the audience, and he found 6 out of 6 doctors blew out on one side. I think 5 blew out on the left and 1 blew out on the right, but that's a reflex that shows how your brain's functioning. And whichever side blows out, it's the opposite side you have to adjust. Well, after we grounded, I had him go back and recheck, and everyone was strong. So we found that grounding, as an example, is another way to rebalance the brain and rebalance the vagus. So this is a critical issue that so many chiropractors are oblivious to.
Right.
Insurance doesn't cover it. It wasn't taught in school. It's not really on the national boards.
Right.
Therefore, it doesn't exist.
Right.
And before, you mentioned maybe 2 or 3 or 4 videos ago, like, how do you know what to recommend to a patient? We don't recommend based on what insurance covers. Right. We don't recommend based on what we think the patient's going to accept. We all hate to get rejected, and we don't want to get rejected. But the superstar, the best in class in the marketplace today, let me tell you what they recommend. What's in the best interest of the patient. How do I best serve the patient is the only question that they ever need to answer. And if insurance pays some of it, none of it, or all of it, so be it.
Right.
If they can't afford it, so be it. But I'm telling my truth, my whole truth, and nothing but my truth. That's what's going to set me free. And that's part of this process. So I think this is a critical piece of the puzzle, and we just need to stay connected. We have to get back to showing up as our best self, do the right things for the right reasons, with the right attitude, the right intention, and let the chips fall where they may. Because I got to tell you, it's scary if you're not in that world right now. And it's scary looking at some of the problems in our profession. But the best in class superstar in our profession, anywhere in the world, regardless of male, female, young or old, no matter what school they graduated from, that's what they focus on.
I agree. That's awesome. And I want to kind of play off of that for a half a second that, this is a struggle I have. I'm not a chiropractor, so I've gained a lot of credibility in my years. I've sat in just about every seat there is to sit that a non-chiropractor can sit. But I have the heart of a chiropractor, and I sometimes tread where I shouldn't. And one of those areas are doctors that don't adjust the cervical spine at all. A patient will come in and they'll just do a lumbar adjustment because that's all the symptom was at that time. And I'm not here to judge people, but as I'm learning more and more and more about this brain-based stuff and the muscle spindles that are actually in the neck versus the muscle spindles that are in the bottom, which send the sensory input, which break up that pattern in the brain. I'm just thinking, I can't believe anyone wouldn't do a cervical adjustment or at least stimulate that area at some point in the visit to be able, and now that you're adding the vagus nerve on that, and that's one of the key areas of stimulating the vagus nerve, I hope that if you're one of those people that are watching this series and you're a solid gondroid, which means you are not doing it unless it shows up. I don't want to challenge the core existence of Gonstead in this process, but I do want to challenge you. This is why we're wanting to change the why behind the adjustment. Gonstead was looking for a subluxation. He was looking for a misalignment. And if it shows, to really make it rudimentary, find a bump and pound it down. I get that. But that's not why we're adjusting in this way of thinking, right? We're adjusting to create balance in the brain. And how do we create the most influence to that process? We've got to look at how the spine was created, where those muscle spindles are, where we're stimulating things like the vagus nerve. And that's why we're adjusting, right? It's not always just because I find a bone out of place. It's because I'm trying to stimulate that area. So I don't want to get you angry. I don't want to step on a hidden bomb, but I do want to challenge you.
Aaron, that's the old heaven. And that's another example of the failure to adapt.
Yeah.
We have to change our thinking. We have to get outside of the box a little bit. We don't have to give up our principles, our passion, our beliefs, but we have to expand our beliefs.
That's right. That's right. And that's all we're asking you to do here. So I love your guys' feedback. Please giving me feedback. I love the emails I'm getting every single day of people asking me questions or challenging something we've said or just stating how excited they are to get this information. But I am pushing you to be a little bit uncomfortable about what you've always found to be true, because I don't think you've considered everything that we're sharing in this series. So thank you for that information again, Dr. Hoffman. I love all the things that you're bringing to the table. And those of you watching, please hear it with the energy that it's given. This isn't a judgment. This isn't an accusation. This isn't saying you've been doing anything wrong. This is just asking you to consider something different. And if you do, I think it'll actually cause a little bit of the change in the way that you behave in the world around you. And so I love it. I appreciate it. We're going to have one more session with Dr. Hoffman, so we can't wait to get your final thoughts, Doc, on this process. So tomorrow we'll kind of wrap things up with Dr. Hoffman. But for those of you watching the series, continue to show it. Make sure you reach out to Dr. Hoffman to get the free resources he's offering. We'll give you more of that information on tomorrow's session. But we love you. We appreciate you. Keep changing the world through the information you're gaining. And together, we're going to make sure that chiropractic becomes the #1 healthcare choice in the world, which is our mission. So we love and we appreciate you.